Top 10 Harms of Comprehensive Sexuality Education, brought to you by NoCSE.sg. The United Nations wrote the International Guidance for Sexuality Education, which guides national governments on how to implement comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE for short. Thankfully, the Singapore government has resisted the United Nations concerning CSE, death penalty, and LGBTQ policies. But what is so harmful about CSE? Find more resources on NoCSE.sg. Harm number 1. 5 to 8-year-old children must learn about love through sexual behaviors. Quote, state that people show love and care for other people in different ways, including kissing, hugging, touching, and sometimes through sexual behaviors. Children are not mature enough to understand the right context for sexual behaviors or disciplined enough to control their curious impulses to explore these sexual behaviors. Harm number 2. 5 to 8-year-old children must define family to include same-sex unions. Quote, describe different kinds of families, example, non-traditional families, express respect for different kinds of families. This sets a foundation for other LGBTQ ideologies to be taught later on. Harm number 3. 9 to 12-year-old children must describe how to feel sexual pleasure. Quote, describe ways that human beings feel pleasure from physical contact, example, kissing, touching, caressing, sexual contact throughout their life. By teaching sexual pleasure at a young age, children are prematurely sexually awakened. They are also not disciplined enough to control their urges to explore sexual pleasure. Harm number 4. 9 to 12-year-old children must learn sexual stimulation. Quote, people have a sexual response cycle, whereby sexual stimulation can produce a physical response. Describe male and female responses to sexual stimulation. Mere awareness about arousal without the skill of self-restraint and calming down leads to heightened sexual curiosity. There should also be limits to this lesson, including not teaching children the means of sexual stimulation. Otherwise, children seek arousal through touching themselves or letting others stimulate them. Harm number 5. 9 to 12-year-old children must affirm transgender ideology. Quote, acknowledge that everyone has a gender identity, appreciate their own gender identity and demonstrate respect for the gender identity of others. This means that children must believe in these gender identities as legitimate identities. Classrooms will become spaces that affirm gender identity. Harm number 6. 9 to 12-year-old children must believe in the right to marry anyone. Quote, acknowledge that all people should be able to decide if, when and whom to marry. This means that young children must support all unions, including gay marriage and possibly even polyamorous marriage. Harm number 7. 12 to 15-year-old teenagers must learn non-penetrative sexual behavior. Quote, recall that non-penetrative sexual behaviors can be pleasurable. Teenagers should be taught to always say no to sexual advances rather than to only mitigate risks that come from having sex. Given that teenagers struggle with their hormonal impulses, the opportunity for sexual arousal should be minimized. Harm number 8. 12 to 15-year-old teenagers must learn that some relationships can become sexual. Quote, discuss how close relationships can sometimes become sexual. Teenagers should be discouraged from sexualizing close relationships. Simply teaching teenagers to manage their emotions is inadequate. The consequence of this lesson is that teenagers are left to decide for themselves which relationships should be sexual. Harm number 9. 15 to 18-year-old teenagers must become LGBTQ and abortion activists. Quote, advocate for local and national laws that support human rights that impact sexual and reproductive health. These laws include, quote, sexual orientation, gender identity, abortion. This is taught as both knowledge and a skill, which means that teenagers must be trained to become activists. Harm number 10. 15 to 18-year-old teenagers must affirm victims of homophobia and transphobia. Quote, recognize that all people should be able to love who they want, demonstrate ways to show support for people experiencing homophobia or transphobia. Teenagers must believe that the way to tackle prejudice is to affirm homosexuality and transgenderism. And that is our top 10 harms of CSE. For more resources about the harms of CSE, go to NoCSE.sg.